It was late last night when the Arden Fair Mall parking lot's yellow streetlights threw their weary light over the pavement. The evening was cool, the night quiet, and within that serene Sacramento night of 2007, 17-year-old Madison Clark disappeared. It had ended moments before with laughter, pop songs, and the simplicity of youth. Madison had been radiant, her smile, her outfit, her enthusiasm for senior year. But by 11:58 p.m., the ecstasy was shattered. Her boyfriend, Tyler Brooks, was suddenly punched unconscious with a single firm punch. When he regained consciousness, Madison's seat next to him was vacant. The only indications were small and bizarre. A cigarette butt, an open beer can, and a pair of unknown footprints vanishing into the night. At the Clark home in its suburban quiet, the night that had started with camera strobes and beaming smiles became a long, torturous silence. As police combed and news filtered through, townsfolk whispered of a lanky, tall man with a slick jacket, a baseball cap low over his face, a specter who would plague Sacramento for years to come. Before we go into the whole story, remember to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you won't miss notifications about our latest true crime deep dives. Now imagine Sacramento late in autumn 2007. The city had that serene, postcard sort of elegance, a capital city nestled in California's Central Valley. Oak and maple trees blushed red and gold, a chilly mist lay low over the lakes and parks, and in a modest house on Arden Street, the Clark family was in high pre-dance spirits. 17-year-old Madison Clark had been counting down the weeks until homecoming. Upstairs, she put on a sparkling emerald green dress that twinkled just so. Her silver heels, ever so slightly too large, as teenage shoes tend to be, added an inch of sophistication. Her dark brown curls tumbled around a bright, assertive face. A heart-shaped silver necklace encircled her neck, a birthday present from her mother, now her go-to piece of jewelry. When she descended from the upstairs, her parents couldn't help but smile. Her father struggled with the camera, her mother tidied her hair. It was one of those golden family moments, proud, happy, captured forever in flash photography. Out in the garage, Tyler Brooks stood waiting in his silver Toyota Corolla, the dashing high school quarterback ready to take his date. They sped away laughing, their headlights disappearing down the block as her parents waved goodbye. At Rio Americano High School, the music and color throbbed in the auditorium. Madison danced, laughed with her friends, and drank sodas, those final innocent hours of teen life. The couple departed around midnight, but instead of going home, they pulled over at the Arden Fair Mall parking lot for some private moments alone before the night was over. They pulled into one of the low yellow lights, the type that don't quite make the corner of the lot. Madison slipped off her heels and let out a relieved sigh. Her feet hurt from dancing for hours. She rested her head on Tyler's shoulder and laughed about their goofy dance steps, their college dreams, and how they couldn't wait to get away from small-town Sacramento. It was sweet, peaceful, the kind of scene you'd want to pause forever. Then, footsteps. Tyler stiffened. Through the rearview mirror, he caught sight of someone, a tall, thin man, walking toward them. The man's shiny green jacket caught the light, and a baseball cap hid most of his face. Tyler frowned, confused. Before he could say anything, Madison's door yanked open. The metallic sound sliced through the quiet. Madison gasped. A coarse hand clamped around her arm. Tyler's hand went to take hold of her and pull her back, but a vicious punch landed on his temple. The world reeled. His head crashed into the doorframe. In his blurry vision, he could see Madison being pulled out, her green dress flying in the cold night wind, her heels scraping against concrete. Then blackness engulfed everything. When Tyler awoke, his head pounded. The Corolla's interior light flashed a pale yellow. Madison's door remained open. The seat next to him vacant. The parking lot empty. Madison Clark was missing. Shaking and covered with blood, Tyler struggled for his phone. His voice rasped as he managed to get the words out to the 911 dispatcher. "My girlfriend, Madison Clark, she's been kidnapped." Someone abducted her right in front of me. The dispatcher told him to remain calm, remain where he was. Red and blue lights swept across the walls of the mall within 10 minutes. Police flooded the parking lot. They removed Tyler from the car, placed him on the hood, and bandaged the cut on his head while the interrogation began. "Did you get a look at the man's face?" one of the officers asked, his face inches away. Tyler blinked in a haze, struggling to recall, but all he could see was that black figure, the shine of the jacket, and Madison's screaming eyes vanishing into the darkness. The officer's query pierced the commotion. "Did you and your girlfriend fight?" Tyler jerked his head up. Pale, shaking, his face was. No, I didn't do it," he stuttered. He was wearing a green jacket, a baseball cap. "I saw him pull Madison away," but as he talked, he felt their gaze on him, suspicious, questioning. That hushed, accusing silence constricted in his chest. The terror of getting blamed began to mingle with the terror of what he'd just survived. In another part of town, at a small house on Whitney Avenue, the phone sounded at 1 a.m. Richard Clark sleepily answered, only to be greeted by a cold, calm voice on the other end. "Mr. Clark, your daughter is missing. We need you and your wife at the station immediately." For a moment or two, the words didn't even register. Then they did, and Elaine Clark was frozen. The glass she was holding slipped, and it shattered on the floor. "Missing?" she breathed, as if pronouncing it would make it not be true. The trip to the station seemed to take forever. Richard's knuckles went white around the wheel. Each red light seemed like forever. Elaine beside him trembled, mouthing frantic prayers under her breath. When they got there, the scene before them was almost too much to bear. Tyler sat in a metal chair, bloody shirt, clutching his head in his hands. He appeared gaunt, barely present. Elaine ran to him and almost fell, crying hysterically. Richard caught her, then turned, anger surging past his sadness. "What are you all standing around for? Where is my daughter? Why have you not found her yet?" A young officer approached, attempting to sound level-headed. "Sir, occasionally teenagers drift off after parties. She may return home on her own." Richard pounded his fist on the desk. "No, my daughter does not run away, and she would never abandon her boyfriend like this." The room fell silent except for Elaine's crying and Tyler's trembling voice. "He took her," he said again, his words cracking. "I swear, I'm not lying. He hit me and took Madison." But even as he spoke, the doubt in the investigator's eyes lingered like a shadow. Within an hour, the story hit the news. Teen girl missing after dance, police suspect abduction. Madison's face was ubiquitous, her green dress, her radiant smile. The same image her parents had snapped barely 2 hours before now haunted every monitor. Elaine hid her face in her hands, crying quietly. Richard stood motionless, red-eyed and empty. Tyler slumped in the corner, reliving every moment in his head. The clanging slam of the door, Madison's scream, the thud of his own head against the frame. The darkness dragged on, heavy with terror and incredulity. And out there, somewhere in that chilly Sacramento night, a 17-year-old girl was lost. At the Arden Fair Mall parking lot, meanwhile, red and blue flash went slicing through the fog. The area was roped off by police with yellow tape. Forensic specialists picked their way through the streetlights, gathering up anything that could help them know what had occurred. A dented, discarded beer can rested on the ground close to the passenger door. "Daggett," the senior technician snapped. A cigarette butt in the area still had the light, smoky odor of tobacco. Every item of evidence was documented, labeled, and sealed, rubber gloves reflecting in the bright white lights. Then someone tapped in a crack in the pavement, an individual brass bullet casing. It shone palely under the light of a flashlight. The tech marked and bagged it, his face set. Close by, footprints stood out sharply in the wet concrete, large, heavy impressions that didn't belong to Madison's heels or Tyler's sneakers. Those also were photographed and plaster cast. Nothing was overlooked. Within Madison's vehicle, she was present as a ghost. She had left her perfume lingering, delicate and feminine. In the back seat there was a small silver handbag, within it her wallet, some bills, her student identification, unopened. On the ground there was her pink Motorola phone, cracked but still radiating light. The last message on the screen stated, "On my way, see you tomorrow." On the door pocket, red lipstick and a shiny hair clip reflected light, still with a lock of brown hair. All seemed locked in suspended time, as if Madison had disappeared in mid-laugh, mid-existence. "This isn't a runaway," one officer grumbled quietly, his eyes fixed on the items. Everyone around him understood he was correct. The forensic team swabbed the beer can, cigarette butt, and a faint fingerprint from the car door handle. "If we're lucky," the lead tech said, "we'll get a DNA profile." But in 2007, lucky was a long shot. Technology wasn't what it is today. They traced the scene, noting where Tyler had been attacked and where Madison had been dragged from the vehicle. The trace amount of blood on the passenger seat was sampled. It probably belonged to Tyler, but every bit counted. Then the glimmer of hope, a surveillance video. Mall security cameras recorded the Corolla driving into the parking lot at midnight. A few seconds later, a shadowy figure walked up, tall, slender, the shiny jacket glinting in the light from the lamppost. The investigators peered at the screen, their eyes glued there, rewinding, pausing, but the video was blurry. The man's face was obscured beneath the cap. For an instant, there was hope in the Sacramento Police Department's watch room. But as fast, it was extinguished. The grainy tape showed nothing but a shadow, a form, no face, no name. The officers shared tired, wordless glances. The case, only hours old, already seemed like a maze with no way out. Outside, beyond the yellow tape, Richard and Elaine Clark stood together, hollow-eyed in the flashing lights. Elaine hugged a photograph of Madison to her chest, tears tracking through her face. Richard's jaw was clenched, his arm around his wife's shoulder, his face a combination of anger and powerlessness no parent should ever be forced to feel. A short distance away, Tyler Brooks sat on a rock step, trembling. His voice was raspy from yelling the same thing. "He was there. I saw him." Again and again, he recounted the same tale, the same words hanging in the air, sounding more and more desperate. Each piece of evidence was bagged, labeled, sealed, as if each and every one might be the one thread that would lead them to Madison. But as the dawn broke over Sacramento, the parking lot fell quiet again. The flashing lights died. The investigators loaded up. And no one yet suspected this night was just the starting point, a long, agonizing journey where hope and despair would forever alternate in the pursuit of Madison Clark. Within a cold room at the station, Tyler slumped in a metal chair. His hands shook, his head still aching from the wound on his temple. The fluorescent light that hung over him hummed softly, bathing his face in faint white. The door clanged open. A bar of gray light slashed across the floor. An officer strode in and slapped a thick file onto the table. Thud. Tyler winced. "Tell it again?" the officer said. Tyler drew a trembling breath. "We were talking in the car, just sitting there. Then I heard footsteps. I looked up and saw this skinny white guy with a shiny green jacket and a baseball cap pulled down. He opened Madison's door and pulled her out. I tried to grab him, but he slapped me, and after that I blacked out." His fists were so tight, his nails cut into his palms. The older officer across the table crossed his arms. "You sure you're not leaving something out? Did you and Madison fight? Lose your temper?" Tyler's eyes went wide with incredulity. "No, I'd never hurt her. I love her." His voice cracked, but rather than sympathy, he only received skepticism. A woman observer in the corner took notes, raising her eyes from time to time to examine him. His voice, his stance, every flutter of his face. Tyler sensed their suspicion like a cold wind. "Why were you alone there?" one of them asked. "Why is your blood the only blood we have?" another pushed. "Why no witnesses?" All the questions pierced deeper. He attempted to remain calm, but fear kept intruding. Richard and Elaine sat huddled in the hallway outside. Elaine's eyes were puffy, her tissue wet through. Richard paced like a tempest bottled up in human form. When he caught wind of a rumor that the police were investigating Tyler, his gut ran icy. Then Tyler was finally brought out of the room. He encountered Richard's gaze, unyielding, questioning, no longer certain what to think. Tyler attempted to say something. "Mr. Clark, I promise I didn't do anything to Madison. I saw him. I really did." But his words struck an empty chord in the charged moment between them. There were no witnesses, no definitive footage, only his account and a city already beginning to question it. By morning, the headlines were vicious. "Boyfriend sole witness in Madison Clark disappearance." Online chat rooms hummed with gossip. Some called to his defense, others condemned him outright. Did he lose it? Were they having a fight? At school, classmates huddled in passageways, and each rumor cut Tyler a little deeper. He couldn't help but think of Madison's face, the smile she'd given him at the dance amidst the flashing lights, her laughter ringing out. And now she was dead, and he was the one people gazed at like a beast. Throughout the evening, police made him recite his tale with the pointed questions designed to deflate each aspect of it. Were you drinking? Taking drugs? Was anyone to vouch you didn't get out of the car? No, he replied again and again. He was taller than I am, thin, white, that shiny green jacket under the streetlight. I couldn't help but identify it. He punched me and took her away. But each time, the detectives simply made notes and gave that same skeptical look. By dawn, they finally let him go. But the expression in their eyes told it all. They didn't trust him. Outside, the world already had turned on him. Reporters flooded the steps, flashes from cameras illuminating the night. "Tyler, did you and Madison fight that night?" one called out. "Did you hurt her?" another bellowed. Tyler dipped his head, making his way through the throng, having the burden of their judgment bearing down on his shoulders. The girl he loved was gone, and somehow he'd become the bad guy in his own nightmare. By dawn, Madison Clark's vanishing had blown across Sacramento. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Every radio station broadcast her name. Police vehicles parked bumper to bumper at the Arden Fair Mall parking lot. Tents were erected to accommodate the flood of tips and calls. Search parties converged. Officers, volunteers, canine squads, all of them eager to find any evidence of her. The dogs led them along the riverbank nearby, noses to the ground, picking up whiffs of faint scent through wet grass and matted trees into Discovery Park. The search extended far into the park's forest trails. Officers walked through each bush, each ditch, their flashlights piercing the fog. But after hours of searching, they discovered nothing. No shoe, no scrap of fabric, no indication of Madison, only quiet, punctuated by the thrum of helicopter rotors moving over the Sacramento River, their spotlights dancing on the black, motionless water. The rhythmic thud of helicopter rotors resonated through the neighborhood, a noise that brought both fear and hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they might discover something. The Clarks' neighborhood seemed to be covered in a blanket of posters. Madison's vibrant, cheerful smile, frozen in emerald green dress, was posted on each light standard, bus stop, and supermarket wall. Large, capital letters yelled the same thing: "Find Madison. Bring her home." From office employees to retirees, the whole town was there. Individuals took flashlights, walking sticks, and water bottles and organized search groups to comb through trails, parks, and abandoned property. Some even combed the deserted suburbs near Carmichael, where Daniel Harrington resided, although at that time his name wasn't on any police roster. At Madison School, the mood was somber. Her fellow students skipped school to assist in the search. You could observe the heartbreak on their young faces as they stood clutching her photograph, shouting her name in the woods and vacant fields, expecting a response that never materialized. At Rio Americano High, her desk remained empty. Her books, pens, and notebooks remained untouched. That vacant seat was the living reminder, and it brought tears to her friends' eyes each time they glared at it. Police established a hotline that rang non-stop. Dozens of tips poured in each hour. Some reported seeing a girl in a green dress near the Greyhound station. Others reported hearing screams near the river later that evening. But every tip ended the same way: nowhere. Days went by, and search teams came back with mud on their faces, waterlogged boots, exhausted faces. Elaine Clark did not leave the site. She remained there all day, shaking, holding on to her daughter's photograph, waiting for each team to come back with nothing. Richard paced and agonized, accosting officers over and over. "Find anything, any new lead?" he'd demand. Each negative headshake struck him like a rock to the heart. By late afternoon, the helicopters landed. The dogs were called off. Night fell, and the search site grew still, just the hum of streetlights flickering over posters flapping in the wind. Hope wasn't gone, but exhaustion had taken its place. An officer rested a hand on Richard's shoulder. "We'll resume tomorrow. Don't give up." Richard nodded, but his eyes, tired and distant, told another story. That evening, Sacramento weighed more heavily. The air itself vibrated with the town's collective prayer: "Please, let tomorrow bring her home." 3 agonizing days went by. No answers. The patience of the community wore thin. The media loomed closer. Every press conference became a firing squad of questions. Any suspects yet? Any sign of Madison? Under increasing pressure, detectives turned their attention elsewhere. They brought up criminal histories within a few miles of Arden Fair Mall, and one name stood out: Gary Mendes, 32. 2 years previously, he'd been detained for harassing women in the very same mall parking lot. He resided a little more than a mile away in a seedy apartment building, unemployed and a regular at neighborhood dive bars, frequently drinking alone. Neighbors reported he'd stare too long, particularly at young women. That evening Madison disappeared. Gary stated that he stayed in, drinking beer and watching television, alone. No witnesses, no evidence. It was sufficient to make him the top suspect. On an early morning, police vehicles swarmed his apartment building. Officers pounded on his door. Gary staggered out, eyes bloodshot, smelling of beer. Before he even had time to understand what was going on, they handcuffed him and took him away as cameras from reporters flashed. Headlines erupted. For the first time in days, the Clarks felt a flicker of hope. Elaine wept when she heard. Richard squeezed her hand tightly. "Maybe now we'll finally know what happened," he whispered. Even Tyler, reading the news from afar, exhaled deeply, as though a tiny weight had lifted off his shoulders. But that hope didn't last long. Inside the interrogation room, Gary swung between bitter laughter and silence. "I don't know who Madison is," he insisted, eyes darting around the room. "I live nearby. Everybody shops there." Still, his sketchy background, his missing alibi, and his tall, lanky frame, similar to the witness description, kept him in custody. Investigators sent his DNA samples straight to the lab, testing them against what they'd collected from the beer can, cigarette butt, and door handle found at the scene. The city waited with bated breath. Reporters speculated. Neighbors shared spooky tales of Gary hanging around in parking lots. All of it fit hand in glove until the tests were returned. And just like that, it all unraveled. None of the DNA was a match. The fingerprints didn't match up. Gary Mendes was completely cleared. The voice of the police chief was somber at the next press conference. "Gary Mendes is not linked to the disappearance of Madison Clark. We are investigating other leads." The words struck the Clarks like ice water. Richard collapsed into a chair, his eyes fixed blankly on the TV. Elaine held her daughter's photograph and wept. Tyler soon found himself at the center of a storm he never anticipated. Since Gary had been cleared, however, the town's gaze shifted onto him. If not Gary, then someone. Whispers began in the aisles of grocery stores, in coffee shops, even in the church pews, and all those whispers pointed in one direction, to Tyler Brooks. Rumors spread quickly, and loneliness followed. Friends drifted away. Strangers gazed too long. The very same community that had come together before now seemed to splinter under suspicion and fear. Folks continued to post Find Madison flyers, continued to participate in the small weekend searches, but their enthusiasm had faded. You could read it in their faces. Hope was evaporating, giving way to solemn resignation. The search, however, had come full circle. No new clues, no suspects, just the same nagging question hanging out there over Sacramento like a fog. Where was Madison Clark? As weeks were replaced by another month, frustration turned into desperation. The case was top news on every newspaper and newscast in California. On KC3, Fox 40, and the Sacramento Bee, the same headlines screamed night after night. The media started making dark parallels with the 1993 Polyclaws kidnapping, the kidnapping that once shocked the entire state. Is this another Polyclaws? A headline cried, the query reverberating in living rooms and social media posts. Panic was spreading faster than information. The Clarks, weary and mourning, found themselves thrust into the public spotlight once more. In a cold, gray afternoon, they stood at a police press conference. The conference room was shoulder to shoulder filled with journalists, the flashes popping like strobe lights. Richard sat beside Elaine, holding a prepared statement. His skin was pale, his nights without sleep etched upon his face, but his eyes blazed with resolve. "We're pleading," he said, his voice shaking. "If anyone can help us, if anyone saw Madison that evening, come forward, please. She's only 17. We just want our daughter safe at home." His final words came out in a cracked whisper. Elaine wept silently into the stunned quiet. She clutched Madison's photo, her smiling daughter in the green dress, and begged between sobs, "She's a good girl. She does not deserve this. Don't remain silent. Let us bring her home." For an instant, even the cameras fell silent. Then the flashes resumed. Outside the station, hundreds of people rallied, chanting Madison's name. Students at Rio Americano wore their school windbreakers, all their voices hoarse from yelling but refusing to be silenced. It was a moment of solidarity, but also of agonizing pain. The media madness only intensified from there. Each evening talk show analyzed the case, prying into Madison's personal history, her friends, her final text messages. Tyler's name was invoked again and again. "The boyfriend is the sole witness," a host declared dramatically. "Can we truly believe him?" That one question, said Anne recycled across radio waves, was sufficient to villainize Tyler in the public's imagination. The Clarks witnessed it all. They wanted to put a stop to it, but couldn't. Each TV spot displaying Madison's face over sensationalized headlines caused their hearts to sink further. At home, the phone didn't ring once. Some were sympathetic or did, let out advice. Others jeered, blamed, even threatened. Elaine collapsed in tears more than once, covering her ears, weeping, "Why are they so cruel?" Richard embraced her, but he was falling apart too, his eyes red and empty after nights without sleep. When he ventured outside, the lenses of reporters dogged him, neighbors tattled. "This pressure is worse than the silence," he said to an investigator in a hushed voice. And indeed, Sacramento police were caving in under their own heat. Reporters peppered them every day. Why no progress? Is this another botched case like Paloma in '93? The comparison smarted. The reality was straightforward, and it was heart-wrenching. Madison was missing, and nobody had any idea where or why. But the Clarks would not go away. They continued to appear before cameras, at neighborhood vigils, anywhere a person might hear them out. But inside those doors, when the microphones stopped rolling, only silence existed. Silence weighted down with sorrow and powerlessness. A year since that night at Arden Fair Mall, Sacramento was still stuck in the same nightmare. Time did not heal, it merely extended the pain thinner. With each new tip, there was a spark of hope, only to flicker out like a candle blown out in the wind. The police maintained an open file, but it was sitting cold. Gary Mendez had long been cleared. There were no new suspects. The evidence collected dust. Grief became a muted routine in the Clark household. Elaine continued to make 2 cups of coffee each day, one for Richard, one for Madison's photograph on the counter. She did it as a reminder of her daughter's existence. Richard made every effort to be strong, but neighbors would watch him sitting on the porch for hours, staring at the horizon as if expecting a figure that never appeared. Madison's bedroom was stuck in time. Her green dress still hung in the closet, neatly folded. Her bed was made. Her desk still contained the unfinished notes for her history class. And Tyler. Although the police had exonerated him, the public had not. Rumors stuck to him like a shadow. Perhaps he did it, people whispered. Perhaps the entire story was a cover-up. And so, as Madison's name crowded the airwaves, Tyler Brooks was something different altogether, the kid everyone glanced over but nobody ever saw. Fed up with the side-eyed stares and whispers, Tyler finally loaded up and left Sacramento behind. He headed to a tiny college way up in Oregon, hoping distance would take the edge off the pain, or at least the suspicion that had dogged him like a shadow. Before leaving, though, he returned to the place where everything had fallen apart, that cold, cracked parking lot outside Arden Fair Mall. Standing there, he stared at the faded yellow tape, still tied to a post, the ghosts of flashing police lights flickering in his memory. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "You're still out there somewhere, Madison. I'll never forget." Then he closed the book, tucked it under his arm, and drove away. At home, Richard and Elaine did not allow their despair to overwhelm them. With the support of friends, Richard started the Bring Madison Home Fund, not only to continue searching for their daughter, but also to bring awareness to teen kidnappings. In 6 months, they were able to raise almost $30,000 not only from Sacramento, but also from contributors as far-flung as San Francisco and Los Angeles. Billboards were erected. Thousands of flyers covered the area, bus stops, supermarkets, stadium entrances, even electronic highway signs, each displaying Madison's happy face and the offer of a $50,000 reward for information. It was a colossal undertaking, fueled by love and desperation, and while people still loved her dearly, everyone could sense that hope was gradually slipping between their fingers. Then came November 2008, a year since Madison had disappeared. That night, hundreds of people came to a candlelight vigil in a small plaza outside Rio Americano High School. The winter air was biting, the sky filled with gray clouds, but the light from 300 candles bathed the night in soft gold. Friends, teachers, neighbors, and even strangers who had only heard her name in the news stood side by side. Elaine stepped forward to speak, clutching a trembling piece of paper. Her voice cracked but carried through the chill. "It's been a year since our daughter left us," she said. "We don't know where she is, or if she's still," her words broke, then steadied. "But we'll never stop looking. Please help us keep this light alive." The audience clapped softly. Others cried. Tyler, who had slipped back from Oregon, stood near the rear, his red-rimmed eyes on the photograph of Madison surrounded by candles that burned fitfully. A few of her friends clasped hands and quietly sang her favorite song. No one uttered it, but everyone understood what a year without answers tended to portend. Nonetheless, the candles burned on, a tenuous defiance against the darkness. Later that evening, Richard spoke to Elaine in a hushed tone. "No matter what occurs, this city is with us." Elaine nodded through tears, a small smile on her lips. They held to that hope that one day, somehow, the truth would be revealed. During the months that followed the vigil, the Bring Madison Home Fund and the Sacramento Police Hotline were inundated with fresh tips. Every phone call made Elaine's heart pound. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps Madison was somewhere out there, waiting to be discovered. A Reno woman reported seeing a girl who resembled Madison at a casino, a young woman wearing a denim jacket, brown curls, laughing by the slot machines. Police leaped on the tip, watching hours of video footage, but the girl on the tape was a lookalike. Weeks went by, and another caller claimed they'd spotted Madison on a beach in San Diego. The Clarks took 8 hours nonstop scouring boardwalks and holding up photos to vendors. Nothing. The girl was a tourist from Arizona, sporting the same smile, and just as they began to get over one letdown, another phone call would arrive. Another man said Madison was alive, tending bar at a Las Vegas establishment. His account was elaborate, believable, to the point of the neon sign outside the joint. For a split second of shaking terror, Richard convinced himself it was true. Nevada police even dispatched a task force to canvass the city's bars. But again, nothing. The man disappeared, his number not traceable. The investigators later concluded he'd fabricated the whole thing, running after reward money. That's when the cruel ones began. Callers requesting money, individuals professing to know where she was, a few even jeering at them with fabricated tales. One evening, following a particularly obscene call, Elaine hurled the phone across the room and bellowed through tears. "How can they be so cruel? How can they toy with our agony?" Richard hugged her as she wept, his eyes welling up with tears. "We'll survive it," he whispered, although his voice trembled. During a press conference, the Sacramento police chief finally confirmed that what everyone suspected. "We've pursued scores of tips, from Nevada to Southern California. Each of them has gone nowhere. We appreciate the public's help in providing verified information only." But the requests didn't stem the tidal wave. Meanwhile, the press jumped on each rumor. Flashing headlines appeared on TV and in papers. Each report set their hearts up, and each disappointment crushed them again and again. Even Tyler, far away in Oregon, wasn't safe. He phoned Richard one evening after reading another false story on the internet. "I had hoped this time would be different," he whispered. "But it's nothing again, isn't it?" In Sacramento, meanwhile, the exhaustion was palpable. Madison's friends became reluctant to participate in new searches, exhausted from disappointment after disappointment. The Find Madison signs that remained stuck on fences and school walls were faded now, corners curled, colors faded by rain and wind. The energy of the community had dissipated. The Clarks were now nearly alone, struggling to keep a dying ember of hope alive. But every false tip was like a twist of a knife, leaving only anger, fatigue, and heartache. By the beginning of 2010, after more than 2 years of relentless searching, the Sacramento police decided to review everything again. Behind closed doors, detectives gathered around a long conference table piled high with files, each one stamped in red. The lead investigator read the final line of the report slowly, his voice heavy. "No clear suspects, no new evidence. We're officially designating this a cold case." The words hung in the air like a funeral bell, dull but destructive. Everybody understood what it represented. All that work, countless interviews, sleepless nights, all for nothing. That afternoon, Madison Clark's file was taken to the cold case unit, where it was placed on a shelf among hundreds of others gathering dust and heartache. The evidence, the beer can, the cigarette butt, the spent bullet casing, the footprints, was placed individually in plastic bags, tagged, and stored for the long haul. It remained there untouched until a day arrived in the future when perhaps, just perhaps, science would be able to speak for Madison at last. The news did not remain secret for long. Within a few hours, a reporter was on local television, her voice grave. Sacramento PD has upgraded the Madison Clark disappearance to cold case status. At home, Richard Clark sat tense before the screen, hands balled in such tight fists the veins stood out in his hands. Elaine wept beside him, her body shaking with sobs. "They're giving up," she wailed. Richard didn't say anything. He just put his arms around her, holding her as hard as he could, as if brute force could stay the flood of sorrow. But the Clarks were not going to give up. If the system had cooled, they would keep Madison's memory warm themselves. Each year, every November 10th, the anniversary of Madison's vanishing day, they took a candlelight vigil at the plaza outside Rio Americano High School. More than 300 showed up the first year. Friends, teachers, even strangers stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the cool night air, each candle held high, faces aglow in the light reflected from Madison's cheerful photo. The years that followed saw the crowds dwindle, but the faithful remained. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, those who would not forget. Elaine would step up to the microphone, her voice shaking. "We don't know where our daughter is, but please, don't forget her." And Richard would quietly light the first candle, its tiny flame glowing like a vow. "We will not allow her to disappear into time." At home, Madison's room remained just the way it was. Her dresses were still hanging neatly in the closet. Her desk still had her incomplete notes. Elaine would sit on the bedside, clutching her daughter's old notebook as if it could still retain her heat. Each Saturday, Richard drove by the Arden Fair parking area, the last place they'd seen her. He'd pull over and sit there for a second, muttering to himself, "I won't give up." Life was now a series of hope and disappointment. The neighborhood had long forgotten. The Find Madison flyers that plastered Sacramento were now faded, ripped, or completely gone. Only a handful of worn-out pictures remained to attach themselves to church bulletin boards, silent reminders of a young woman who disappeared in the middle of the day. Television coverage slowed down as well. New stories overshadowed her. And yet, for the Clarks, time never lessened the pain. It only morphed into something new. It wasn't piercing anymore, but heavy, ongoing, impossible to put down. Whenever another missing persons case was on the news, Elaine would cry and ask, "Will our daughter be forgotten like this?" Richard would grip her hand, unable to respond because he wondered the same thing. By December of 2010, the Madison Clark case had been officially designated as cold. Just another folder out of hundreds, sealed and forgotten. But not for Richard, Elaine, and the few who didn't give up. The vigil of each passing year was a silent promise to remain waiting no matter the wait. Then, almost 12 years after, 2019, something changed. DNA technology had advanced far. What took months was now being achieved in weeks, precision like detectives had never had in 2007. At the cold case unit meeting, a lieutenant made a suggestion that was daring. "Let's team up with a lab in Texas, Aram Lab. They're employing genealogical DNA, comparing samples to ancestry databases. It could provide something new." It was a risky concept, costly, and not even certain. But after all these years of suffering, the Sacramento police consented to attempt it. For the Clarks, this was a last thread of hope. The sealed evidence boxes were opened in stark lab lighting and attentive eyes. The beer can, the cigarette butt, the swabs from the Corolla door handle, all maintained for more than a decade, waiting for this exact moment. Aram Lab received the samples and began processing them with cutting-edge micro-DNA extraction. One of the senior investigators later admitted, "I couldn't sleep that night. We've been let down too many times, but this one feels different." When the lab built the DNA from the cigarette, the evidence came out surprisingly robust, strong enough to begin a comparison. But rather than processing it through CODIS, the standard criminal database, they fed it into GEDmatch, a publicly available genealogy website where millions of Americans had contributed their DNA for the purpose of ancestry research. The following days were a waiting game. Thousands of potential matches were combed through by technicians. They were mostly remote fourth or fifth cousins of little use. But then, one evening, a name caught their notice. A Sacramento family, an unusual last name. The lab report stated the name brought everyone to a halt. Harrington. Detectives had canvassed residents outside Arden Fair Mall in 2007, but the Harringtons had never been suspected. No criminal history, no odd behavior, just another unassuming suburban couple. But 12 years later, all traces of DNA evidence led directly to them. When the findings reached Sacramento, the cold case office buzzed with a rare mix of hope and disbelief. A digital family tree filled the projection screen, sprawling across multiple states, but its roots traced back to Carmichael, a quiet suburb barely 10 minutes from where Madison disappeared. A young detective leaned forward, eyes bright. "For the first time in years," he said, "we've got something real to hold on to." But beneath the excitement was fear. What if this, too, came to nothing? Richard and Elaine Clark were summoned for a one-on-one meeting. They sat with the detectives, attempting to keep up with the scientific jargon, but only one piece of information really stuck. After 12 excruciating years, there was a new lead. Elaine squeezed Richard's hand, her eyes brimming with tears. "At least there's still hope," she whispered. Richard's voice was firm but quiet. "Just give me a name," he said, "and I won't stop." The DNA find wasn't publicized yet, but rumors began to circulate. Some journalists heard about it, placing cryptic headlines. For Sacramento, a city that had gone quiet on Madison, the tale began to wake up again. For the Clarks, it meant something even bigger, hope that now had a form. When RM Lab formally connected the genetic information to the Harrington family, the detectives immediately began digging into the family tree. A demographic map flared with names spread out across Oregon, Nevada, and California. One of them jumped out. Daniel Harrington, 47, still a resident of Carmichael, less than 10 minutes from the Arden Fair parking lot. Daniel was a repairman for air conditioning. Married with 2 teenage sons, white one-story house with immaculately trimmed lawn and a basketball hoop in the driveway. To neighbors, he was the epitome of an honest, hard-working family man. He attended church every Sunday, repaired neighbors' AC systems without cost, and always greeted with a wave. So when the DNA connection led to his family, it ran shivers through the team. If that was true, then Madison's kidnapper had been living right under their noses for 12 years. The top detective summed it up bleaky: Daniel's clean. No arrests, no trouble. But sometimes, normal is the best disguise. They began sifting through his history. Credit card transactions indicated that he hadn't traveled outside Sacramento the weekend Madison disappeared. His boss verified he wasn't working overtime that afternoon. Some witnesses even recalled seeing a small green work van exactly like his near the mall one evening. But so many years later, memories were hazy and none of it could withstand courtroom scrutiny. Phone records? Nothing out of the ordinary. His older cell phone didn't have GPS tracking at the time. A void, too hollow to establish innocence, yet too specific to be dismissed. Daniel Harrington became the quiet eye of an emerging tempest. A secret surveillance unit established outside his house, sitting a white van masquerading as a plumbing business a few houses down. With long lens cameras, they observed him departing for work in the mornings, returning home at night, having dinner with his family, and going to church on Sundays. All seemed agonizingly normal, but to detectives, that ordinary routine was what made it so chilling. If Daniel was guilty, he'd been living openly among his neighbors under the radar for more than a decade. The officers interviewed people who knew him quietly. "Daniel?" one older woman said, shuffling her head. "He's the sweetest man on the street." repaired my air ducts for free. I can't think he'd be mixed up in something like this." The team looked on nervously. It was a pattern they knew all too well: thugs who presented a good face, their evil tidily concealed behind worn smiles in small towns. When police finally informed the Clarks that the DNA evidence led to the name of one person, Elaine cried. Richard uttered only 2 words: "It's time." They sat in the living room that evening, Madison's memorial candle burning low on the coffee table. The dancing light illuminated their weary faces. "If he's really him," Elaine murmured, "he's been just blocks away for 12 years. It sent a shiver down her spine. Richard grasped her hand, his eyes hard with resolve. "This time," he said, "we do it, no matter how long it takes." With Daniel Harrington now in their crosshairs, the Sacramento police knew they had to tread carefully. One leak, one whisper, and their sole hope would be reduced to ashes. The surveillance team maintained its stealthy vigil day by day, night by night. Daniel's green van arrived and departed with clockwork regularity. Family meals, Sundays at church, neighbors' smiles. One last step remained for the team, and it had to be perfect. They could not search Daniel's residence without a warrant, but by law, if he threw something away in public, that trash was open season. So they waited. Late on a Thursday evening, before the garbage truck was scheduled to arrive, Daniel rolled his green bin down the driveway as he did each week. With the house lights flickering off, 2 unmarked officers closed in. Within 28 seconds, the bags were scooped up into a sealed evidence bin and taken away. Inside the surveillance van, there was complete silence. The air was thick, virtually charged. In that garbage, forensic examiners discovered what they were looking for: half-full cans of soda, an opened-up water bottle, and most notably, mangled toothpicks still with saliva residue on them. Everything was sealed, marked, and sent directly to the lab. Then the waiting began. Long, sleepless nights with hope and fear. One of the researchers afterward mentioned, "I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about Madison in that green dress and then picturing him having dinner with his family for 12 years under the radar." At last, the results were in. The lead detective ripped open the envelope, reading the report. A thick line at the bottom caught his breath. A moment of quiet. Then a flood of emotion, shuddering breaths, open eyes, disbelief being overtaken by relief and anger. 12 years of heartache and dead ends, and they had it now. The DNA from the discarded trash that Daniel had tossed into the recycling bin matched exactly with the samples taken from the beer can and cigarette butt near Madison's silver Corolla. That evening, an emergency meeting was convened. The police chief slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't a theory anymore," he said. "This is the truth. Daniel Harrington was there the night Madison disappeared." Veteran detectives, grizzled and hard-bitten from years of disillusionment, nodded quietly, some with tears in their eyes. They set to work straight away, developing a cautious arrest plan, swift, coordinated, and stealthy enough not to alert the neighborhood. They didn't inform the Clarks immediately, but one officer has since admitted that he wept reading the laboratory report. "After all the years," he said, "I knew justice was finally near." For 12 grueling years, thousands of hours, hundreds of false leads, everything now came down to 3 words: 100% DNA match. That evening, patrol cars rolled quietly through Carmichael's sleepy streets. The young officer, staring out the window at the warm porch lights of the tidy homes, whispered, "We're about to bring Madison home." September 12, 2020, a morning that would be etched into Sacramento's memory. As the sun came up over the maple trees, red and blue lights reflected off hoods of cars and windows along a sleeping suburban street. Police cars, sirens quiet, but lights flashing, stood in clusters around Daniel Harrington's white one-story home. Neighbors looked through curtains. There was the pounding on the front door, sharp, authoritative. A moment later, Daniel materialized, gray-haired, disheveled, in a stained old t-shirt and shorts. His eyes were bewildered with confusion. Officers intervened before he could utter a word. In seconds, he was on the lawn, face against the grass, handcuffs clicking into place around his wrists. His teenage wife screamed from the doorway. His adolescent sons yelled in shock. Neighbors emerged onto sidewalks, their morning routines disrupted. The man they'd known, the guy who repaired air conditioners, borrowed tools, waved at neighbors, now lay face down in the ground, having his Miranda rights read to him. In less than an hour, the tale burst onto all the major networks. Reporters descended upon the street. Cameras blazed so hard it resembled a lightning storm. One of the neighbors, Ruth McKinney, shook in front of a KC3 camera, her words cracking. "Daniel? No, I don't believe it. He unclogged my AC filter last summer. Someone like that, how could he?" Another, Frank Howard, shook his head in incredulity. "We sat in the same church pew, sang hymns together. I can't accept this." Apathy gave way to anger. For 13 years, a man accused of kidnapping a teenage girl had lived among them, smiling at block parties and Sunday worship. At Daniel's church, the pastor spoke that afternoon with a heavy voice. "We can never truly know what hides behind a friendly face, but justice will spare no one." Meanwhile, miles away, Richard and Elaine Clark got the call they'd waited over a decade to receive. Richard's hands shook as he listened. Elaine sobbed beside him. "He's been arrested," the officer said. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just clung to one another, both shaking under the impact of the moment. It wasn't joy, it was a tentative kind of relief, raw and shaking. In Sacramento, the whole city breathed out. Newscasts broke down each side with Madison's beaming face in her emerald green gown. Legal professionals verified the DNA match was foolproof. This was not an error. On social media, thousands posted her picture with one comment, but the celebration brought anger along with it. He dined with his family while Madison's parents endured hell, a resident posted on social media. That evening, more than 500 people gathered outside the Sacramento Police Department, candles in hand. Elaine stood before them, her voice hoarse but steady. "We've waited 13 years for this day," she said. "Please let justice run its course." The crowd responded in unison, chanting Madison's name. "Madison! Madison!" As candles flickered in the warm night air, Sacramento glowed with a quiet, solemn light, the light of a promise finally kept. Excellent continuation. This section carries strong emotional weight and real procedural tension. To prepare this segment for maximum cinematic and narrative impact, keeping your documentary/crime drama tone, here's a rephrased version that tightens pacing, clarifies emotion, and sharpens atmosphere, while keeping all your factual beats intact. To some, the outrage wasn't so much that the case had finally cracked. It was that the suspect proved to be who everyone trusted. A man whom everyone trusted. The news sent a spine-tingling reminder through Sacramento. Evil does not always hide in the dark. Sometimes it smiles back at you from behind the fence. Within the Sacramento Police Department, under the fluorescent hum of cold lights, Daniel Harrington sat in the interrogation room. The steel chair groaned under him, wrists still bearing the indentation of the cuffs. A thick file rested on the table. Clark, Madison, missing person 2007. Daniel's eyes darted at it for a moment before he looked up into the faces of the two investigators seated across from him. His voice was steady, practiced. "I don't know any Madison Clark," he said bluntly. The lead detective leaned forward, elbows digging into the table. "You don't know her. You lived under 10 minutes from the spot she disappeared. You worked there." The second investigator opened the file, drawing out clear evidence bags, each one at a time, a battered beer can, crushed cigarette, toothpicks broken in half. "Know these?" Daniel's brow creased, but he remained quiet. The investigator's voice grew cold. "DNA from these matches perfectly with the evidence collected at the scene the evening Madison disappeared." No error. No maybe. Explain that. For a flash of a second, Daniel's calm was breached. His breathing grew more rapid. His jaw clenched. And then silence. The silence that shouted more than words. The investigators were not given time to push on, however, for the door opened. A man in a gray suit came briskly in, Harrington's newly hired attorney. "This interview is over," he snapped. "My client will no longer respond to any questions." The detectives shared resigned looks. One shut the file and murmured quietly, "DNA does not lie. You can remain quiet today, but truth won't." Daniel remained silent as he was escorted out, his attorney's hand on the back of his shoulder. The room remained heavy with tension, like the air itself had been frozen. Over the next few days, detectives came back for more. They played hard to get, turning sometimes hard and sometimes soft. They flashed Daniel pictures of Madison, her beaming smile, her homecoming dress, and the parking lot where she'd disappeared, splattered with her friend Tyler's blood. "Look at her," one of the detectives said. "You still want to claim you weren't there?" Daniel gazed down, lips shuddering, muttering, "I don't remember." But the fissures were deepening. The sleepless nights, the frigid meals, the slam of the cell door, all eroded the mask he had constructed for 13 years. On the fifth day, his will crumbled. His voice shook. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Daniel replied, his voice trembling. "I was drunk," she screamed. "I panicked." His tail faltered. When confronted with the bullet casing, he shifted once more. "I had a gun, just to scare her. I didn't shoot. I just wanted her quiet." "And what happened after that?" an investigator asked. "What did you do with Madison?" Daniel paused, then let out a deep, shattered sigh. I drove out to Folsom Lake. There's a canyon, a crevice by the rocks. I thought nobody would ever discover her." The words dangled like a tempest over the room. When questioned about directions, landmarks, roads, his story fractured. Inconsistencies slithered through each line. But for the first time after 13 years of silence, authorities knew they were finally on the doorstep of the truth. Masterful section, this is where your story reaches maximum emotional and visual intensity. The pacing, the disclosure, the tragedy are all present. It only needs a cinematic sheen to maximize immersion, rhythm, and image, ideal for documentary narration, screenwriting, or YouTube true crime narration. Here's a polished pro-level rewrite that retains all the details but uses more cinematic tone, tighter rhythm, and deeper emotion. He initially indicated a path on the West Bank, later switched to the North Side. His recollection clouded over in guilt, fear, or maybe strategy. Detectives unfurled an elaborate map of Folsom Lake onto the table. Daniel's shaking hands hovered, then encircled a canyon, steep, isolated, sliced through by a meandering dirt road and dense underbrush. "There," he mumbled. "I believe it was there." No one spoke. The room felt suspended in air. The lead investigator finally closed the file. "Then we'll go there," he said quietly. "And if you're lying, you've just buried yourself deeper." Daniel leaned back, eyes shut, face tight, a man who'd finally let the truth slip, but couldn't yet face its weight. Reporters descended upon the street. Cameras blazed so hard, it resembled a lightning storm. One of the neighbors, Ruth McKinney, shook in front of a KC3 camera, her words cracking. "Daniel? No, I don't believe it. He unclogged my AC filter last summer. Someone like that, how could he?" Another, Frank Howard, shook his head in incredulity. "We sat in the same church pew. Both them sang hymns together. I can't accept this." Apathy gave way to anger. For 13 years, a man accused of kidnapping a teenage girl had lived among them, smiling at block parties and Sunday worship. At Daniel's church, the pastor spoke that afternoon with a heavy voice. We can never truly know what hides behind a friendly face, but justice will spare no one. Meanwhile, miles away, Richard and Elaine Clark got the call they'd waited over a decade to receive. Richard's hands shook as he listened. Elaine sobbed beside him. "He's been arrested," the officer said. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They just clung to one another, both shaking under the impact of the moment. It wasn't joy. It was a tentative kind of relief, raw and shaking. In Sacramento, the whole city breathed out. Newscasts broke down each side, with Madison's beaming face in her emerald green gown. Legal professionals verified the DNA match was foolproof. This was not an error. On social media, thousands posted her picture with one comment, but the celebration brought anger along with it. He dined with his family while Madison's parents endured hell, a resident posted on social media. That evening, more than 500 people gathered outside the Sacramento Police Department, candles in hand. Elaine stood before them, her voice hoarse but steady. "We've waited 13 years for this day," she said. "Please, let justice run its course." The crowd responded in unison, chanting Madison's name. Madison! Madison! As candles flickered in the warm night air, Sacramento glowed with a quiet, solemn light, the light of a promise finally kept. Excellent continuation, this section carries strong emotional weight and real procedural tension. To prepare this segment for maximum cinematic and narrative impact, keeping your documentary/crime drama tone, here's a rephrased version that tightens pacing, clarifies emotion, and sharpens atmosphere while keeping all your factual beats intact. To some, the outrage wasn't so much that the case had finally cracked, it was that the suspect proved to be who everyone trusted. A man whom everyone trusted. The news sent a spine-tingling reminder through Sacramento: evil does not always hide in the dark. Sometimes it smiles back at you from behind the fence. Within the Sacramento Police Department, under the fluorescent hum of cold lights, Daniel Harrington sat in the interrogation room. The steel chair groaned under him, wrists still bearing the indentation of the cuffs. A thick file rested on the table. Clark, Madison, missing person 2007. Daniel's eyes darted at it for a moment before he looked up into the faces of the two investigators seated across from him. His voice was steady, practiced. "I don't know any Madison Clark," he said bluntly. The lead detective leaned forward, elbows digging into the table. "You don't know her. You lived under 10 minutes from the spot she disappeared. You worked there. Explain that." The second investigator opened the file, drawing out clear evidence bags, each one at a time: a battered beer can, crushed cigarette, toothpicks broken in half. "Know these?" Daniel's brow creased, but he remained quiet. The investigator's voice grew cold. "DNA from these matches perfectly with the evidence collected at the scene the evening Madison disappeared. No error. No maybe. Explain that." For a flash of a second, Daniel's calm was breached. His breathing grew more rapid, his jaw clenched, and then silence, the silence that shouted more than words. The investigators were not given time to push on, however, for the door opened. A man in a gray suit came briskly in, Harrington's newly hired attorney. "This interview is over," he snapped. "My client will no longer respond to any questions." The detectives shared resigned looks. One shut the file and murmured quietly, "DNA does not lie. You can remain quiet today, but truth won't." Daniel remained silent as he was escorted out, his attorney's hand on the back of his shoulder. The room remained heavy with tension, like the air itself had been frozen. Over the next few days, detectives came back for more. They played hard to get, turning sometimes hard and sometimes soft. They flashed Daniel pictures of Madison, her beaming smile, her homecoming dress, and the parking lot where she disappeared, splattered with her friend Tyler's blood. "Look at her," one of the detectives said. "You still want to claim you weren't there?" Daniel gazed down, lips shuddering, muttering, "I don't remember." But the fissures were deepening. The sleepless nights, the frigid meals, the slam of the cell door all eroded the mask he had constructed for 13 years. On the fifth day, his will crumbled. His voice shook. "All right. I was there that night. I pulled her away." "I didn't mean to hurt her," Daniel replied, his voice trembling. "I was drunk," she screamed. "I panicked." His tale faltered. When confronted with the bullet casing, he shifted once more. "I had a gun just to scare her. I didn't shoot. I just wanted her quiet." "And what happened after that?" an investigator asked. "What did you do with Madison?" Daniel paused, then let out a deep, shattered sigh. I drove out to Folsom Lake. There's a canyon, a crevice by the rocks. I thought nobody would ever discover her." The words dangled like a tempest over the room. When questioned about directions, landmarks, roads, his story fractured. Inconsistencies slithered through each line. But for the first time, after 13 years of silence, authorities knew they were finally on the doorstep of the truth. Masterful section. This is where your story reaches maximum emotional and visual intensity. The pacing, the disclosure, the tragedy are all present. It only needs a cinematic sheen to maximize immersion, rhythm, and image, ideal for documentary narration, screenwriting, or YouTube true crime narration. Here's a polished, pro-level rewrite that retains all the details but uses more cinematic tone, tighter rhythm, and deeper emotion. He initially indicated a path on the West Bank, later switched to the North Side, his recollection clouded over in guilt, fear, or maybe strategy. Detectives unfurled an elaborate map of Folsom Lake onto the table. Daniel's shaking hands hovered, then encircled a canyon. Steep, isolated, sliced through by a meandering dirt road and dense underbrush. "There," he mumbled. "I believe it was there." No one spoke. The room felt suspended in air. The lead investigator finally closed the file. "Then we'll go there," he said quietly. "And if you're lying, you've just buried yourself deeper." Daniel leaned back, eyes shut, face tight, a man who'd finally let the truth slip, but couldn't yet face its weight. Amidst all the publicity, Richard and Elaine Clark did not speak. Richard made one short public statement. "We have nothing to say about him. All we care about is Madison, and she's finally home." But Sacramento's aftershocks remained. Madison was mourned at the false sense of security. The discovery that her murderer was not some shadowy figure but a familiar neighbor became a wound the city would never recover from. When Daniel Harrington was officially charged, there was another name to resurrect itself, one associated with years of confusion and misplaced blame: Tyler Brooks. 13 years later, Tyler, a former 18-year-old with a soft smile and a borrowed vehicle, now aged 31, lived quietly in Oregon. His face was aged, his eyes weighed down by memory. The prosecutor's phone call brought it all back. He returned to Sacramento, the city that had once tagged him with suspicion and rumor. In a deposition room, Tyler sat across from the prosecutor, clasped hands, shaking voice, resolve. "I remember that night clearly," he started. "We went homecoming, parked close to Arden Fair Mall. Madison kicked off her shoes, rested on my shoulder. We were talking, just talking, and then I heard footsteps." He paused, faraway eyes. I glanced up and saw him. Tall, white, thin, shiny coat, low baseball cap. He opened the door of Madison's car. I attempted to grab him, but he struck me. Hard. Everything went black. The last thing I remembered seeing was him pulling her away, her green dress fluttering in the headlights. The prosecutor opened Daniel Harrington's confession, the one that confessed to going up to the Corolla and assaulting Tyler before kidnapping Madison, softly. The facts were matched nearly to perfection, like two sides of the same bad dream. Online, they accused me of making it up, that I was covering for something. I left town, but the guilt didn't depart. He bowed his head, eyes red. I loved Madison. She was everything. And for 13 years, I've been haunted by the blame that I could not save her. The prosecutor gently closed the file. Tyler, you did as much an 18-year-old could. Your witness will bring her justice. But Tyler shook his head. It doesn't take away what I saw. Her heels screeching on pavement, her scream ringing in my head. I'll never be able to unhear it. Weeks later, at the preliminary hearing, Tyler stood before the courtroom, now older and stronger, but visibly wounded. All eyes were on him as he recounted the night Madison went missing. His testimony mirrored Daniel's confession point by point, sealing the truth in the minds of jurors. Richard and Elaine Clark sat in the front row, holding each other's hands. Tears ran silently down their cheeks. The boy once accused had become the man who gave their daughter's final moments a voice. When Tyler stepped down from the stand, he paused by Madison's photograph on the evidence table. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Outdoors, journalists closed in on him. His voice broke when he talked. For 13 years, I lived in darkness. Now the truth is out, but the pain won't ever go away. For Sacramento, his testimony was something more than proof. It was redemption, the evidence that truth endures even through years of rumor and destruction. But for Tyler Brooks, it didn't change a thing within. He had told the truth, but he always bore the face of Madison, pulled into the darkness, a scream he could not halt in his mind for the rest of his life. By the spring of 2021, the Sacramento County Superior Court was wall-to-wall with reporters, neighbors, families, all waiting for Daniel Harrington's trial. The city that had once dreaded silence now was ready to listen and see justice served. Here's a refined, cinematic reworking of your courtroom and funeral sequence, retaining all emotional moments, tension, and detail, but refining phrasing, pace, and rhythm for maximum affect. Outside, hundreds stood, clutching candles and signs featuring Madison Clark's face, the words "Justice for Madison" burning in flickering light. The mood was tense, but also solemn. Everyone knew this was the moment 13 years waiting had built to. Daniel Harrington walked into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists manacled, eyes downcast. Richard and Elaine Clark occupied the front pew, gaunt faces set but burning eyes steady. Behind them, Tyler Brooks, the witness who had borne the memory of that night for more than a decade, sat with clenched hands. The prosecutor started, voice steady, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a hypothetical case. This is a case of unassailable truth. We have DNA, a confession, Madison Clark's remains, and her mementos, all leading to one man, Daniel Harrington. Evidence flashed on a giant screen. The 2007 beer can and cigarette butt, the 2020 soda cans and toothpicks found in Daniel's garbage. A forensic expert testified the DNA is a perfect match, no margin of error. Next, the room went quiet as Daniel's quivering recorded confession was heard. I pulled her away. I hid her in a canyon near Folsom Lake. The words lingered in the air like knives. Images of Madison's dig sites surfaced next, her skeletal body, pieces of the iridescent green dress, the silver heart-shaped locket. Elaine cried, shoving her face into Richard's shoulder. He hugged her, tears pricking, eyes glued to each shred of veracity revealed. The defense attorney stood, trying a counterattack. He argued Daniel's memory, after 13 years, could betray him. No eyewitness directly witnessed Harrington take Madison, he stated. The prosecutor countered immediately. We have a witness knocked unconscious at the scene, Tyler Brooks, whose testimony aligns perfectly with the defendant's confession. We have irrefutable DNA, and Madison's body was found exactly where the defendant led us. His voice cracked, but his gaze never wavered. I watched him pull Madison away. He struck me. I recall the shiny vest, the baseball cap. I'll never forget. Elaine's soft weeping resonated from the first row. Day after day, the trial moved forward, every bit of evidence painstakingly pieced together. The segments fell into place, creating an inescapable narrative. Concluding, the prosecutor stood before the jury. We waited 13 years for this truth. Madison Clark was robbed of her 17th year, her future. Justice may be delayed, but it will arrive. Today, you are the voice of justice. Hours passed, and the jury came back. The courtroom waited in silence. Have you reached a verdict? Asked the judge. Yes, replied the four voices as one. We find the defendant, Daniel Harrington, guilty of kidnapping and first-degree murder. Gasps and sobs echoed through the room. Elaine held tight to Richard, both sobbing. Tyler hung his head, hands over his face, tears flowing. The judge spoke. Daniel Harrington, you are sentenced to life without parole. The words hung like a tolling bell, closing 13 years of pain. Daniel lay still, face white, as guards took him away. Outdoors, the crowd erupted in cheers. Justice for Madison. Candles burned, tears mixed with hesitant smiles, and for the first time in more than a decade, justice delayed sparkled. In fall 2021, Sacramento hosted a special funeral. Not for someone newly deceased, but for a girl missing 13 years, finally buried. The downtown cathedral was packed with weepers, family, friends, neighbors, and strangers who had tracked Madison's case through posters and news reports. Outside, her giant portrait shone, 17-year-old Madison beaming in her green dress, eyes brimming with potential. Hundreds of candles danced in the morning air, a symbol of the community's abiding hope and sorrow. Inside, the white coffin was draped with roses and daisies, representative of purity and bereavement. The silver heart-shaped necklace found in the canyon lay on it, shining in the dim candlelight. Elaine trailed behind the coffin at a slow pace, holding Richard's hand. Every step was measured, filled with years of unfathomable grief. The cathedral grew quiet, hearts shattered but one in remembrance. Madison Clark, home at last, was greeted with love that never faltered, life remembered even in passing. If you prefer, I can resume the epilogue next, providing the life of the Clarks post-trial, Tyler's healing from trauma, and Sacramento community recovery, presenting a complete, emotionally rewarding conclusion. This would read as a concluding chapter in a true crime documentary screenplay. Here is a refined, cinematic, and emotionally charged version of your last section, maintaining all the heart and societal insights while enhancing flow, pace, and readability. Elaine had on a plain black dress, gaunt face but determined eyes. Richard escorted her, carrying a lighted white candle, into the cathedral. Our daughter is home at last, he murmured, voice cracking, eliciting tears from other onlookers. A mournful organ hymn hung in the air. Madison's former classmates, now in their 30s, some of whom had kids of their own, sat in the front row. Hands folded, eyes streaming, they stared at her picture. A friend stood up, shaking voice. We vowed to attend college together, to see the world together, but Madison never had that opportunity. Today, we fulfill our last commitment to bring her home. Her words rang out in the hall, and they touched every heart. Richard stood before the pulpit, hand on the coffin of his daughter. He leaned forward, voice firm but warm. For 13 years, we waited in the purgatory of uncertainty. We didn't know where our daughter was. Today, seeing her buried, we want to say justice may be late, but it is needed. We thank all those who never lost hope. Elaine trailed behind, her voice shaking but firm. Madison is gone, but her story will live on in every heart here. Remember, every missing child deserves to be searched for, never forgotten. The whole cathedral rose to its feet, applauding reverently a mass promise of commitment. Hundreds of candles flickered, turning the somber space into an ocean of golden light. Outside, hundreds of city high school students made their way, carrying posters of Madison's face. Gently, they sang Amazing Grace. The song carried through the streets, blending with the tolling bells of the cathedral. The funeral procession inched along towards the cemetery, a mile-long line of automobiles trailing behind. On the sidewalks, individuals stood wordlessly, hands at heart, scattering white flowers as the coffin went by. Richard got down beside the graveside to restore Madison's silver necklace, as though restoring her soul with her last keepsake. Elaine joined him on the ground, lightly kissing the coffin lid again, tears dropping silently. When the earth was sealed, a silence descended on the group. Then a tiny voice shattered it. A little girl, friend of Madison's acquaintance, stood up, leaving a small doll on the grave. "For Aunt Madison," she whispered. The innocent gesture brought tears to many. Media coverage increased after the funeral, not only of Madison's tragic tale, but of the lasting message of the Clarks: never give up. Scholarships and awareness programs were created in her honor, promoting child protection and crime prevention. That night, Sacramento was lit up by candlelight. In the main square, thousands filled the space, each with a flame in hand, faces a cross between sadness and determination. Over them, a big banner, "Justice for Madison and for all children who are still missing." Richard spoke to the crowd. "We lost our daughter, but not our faith. If justice arrived for Madison after 13 years, it can arrive for others. Keep this candle burning." The crowd was unanimous in their response, chanting, "Justice. Justice." Sacramento was purged that evening. 13 years of suffering ended with a respectful funeral, leaving a message timeless. Belated justice is justice. Madison Clark's spirit lived on, a testament to faith, determination, and refusal to let go. Madison Clark's tale is one of warning for contemporary America. Violence can happen in areas that we think are secure, a parking lot at a mall, a neighborhood we know. The fact that Daniel Harrington, a quiet, church-attending neighbor, was the perpetrator illustrates that evil may lurk behind the friendliest of smiles. Her case also highlights the power of technology and determination. DNA from a 2007 beer can and cigarette, but previously useless, proved to be the key in 2019 through forensic examination. Science investment by law enforcement and assiduous attention to detail delivered justice where years of dead ends could not. The Clarks' unyielding commitment, holding candlelight vigils for years, refusing to lose hope, found its culmination in Madison's funeral, a dignified, somber acknowledgement that justice is late, but it is essential. Madison Clark's 13-year odyssey is a call to action to every American. Continue to speak out, keep the candle burning, because justice may be slow in coming, but if we ever give up, it will never arrive. If Madison's case spoke to your heart, subscribe to this channel for future updates. Join me and my team as we keep bringing light into the darkest alleys, showing that justice, however belatedly, will always triumph.